Most of us know Lordran like the back of our hands. We know the boss patterns, the shortcut routes, and where exactly every little Titanite shard is hidden. But there are still those weird spots in Dark Souls you have never noticed, because we usually sprint through these areas or are fighting for our lives. Due to this, we often ignore the smaller details that make the world feel more alive. Think about the very first cell where you start the game. Most people just grab the key and leave, without actually taking a moment to stop and look at the floor, which is crawling with roaches. There is also a pile of rotting hay in the corner, and right next to it is a ceramic jar used as a latrine with actual chunks of poop on it. Then there are the spots that seem physically impossible to reach until you accidentally stumble into them. Like this hidden spot in Dark Souls with the 3 hidden chests. You can only discover this area by a jump that looks impossible to do, or by walking into what looks like a death pit. These are not just weird locations. They are specifically overlooked spots that make the world feel strangely bizarre once you finally notice them. And in this video, we will be taking a moment to observe and hypothesize the lore and geometry behind these spots that almost everyone walks past 100 times without ever seeing them. At the very beginning of the game in the Undead Asylum, you meet Oscar of Astora, dying in a small stone room, lying on a pile of stones. Most of the players just quickly grab the Estus flask as well as the Asylum key and book their way out of the site. But if you observe carefully, something feels fundamentally off. The rest of the room has no door. The only opening you find is made by the massive boulder rolled over by the staircase, which destroys the wall. But how did Oscar get there? The theory is that the Asylum demon literally smashed Oscar through the roof of the building. He did not walk or glitch into that room, but was rather thrown into it, with enough force to collapse the stone ceiling. That also explains why he is paralyzed and dying when you find him. Once you have grabbed your starting gear and headed through the fog gate, you will find yourself on a stone balcony overlooking the first bonfire you rested at. Naturally, since you see the ledge below, your first instinct would be to try to walk or jump over the ledge. But as soon as you do so, you will hit a literal invisible wall and get knocked backwards onto the balcony. I think this was put out there so you follow the intended route in the Undead Asylum and complete the tutorial in the way that From Software intended. Right next to that invisible wall on the balcony, there is a path leading towards a broken staircase which you cannot grab as of now. And right next to that broken staircase is a long narrow hallway stretching out that serves absolutely no purpose in the game. It is unremarkably long, completely empty, and leads to nothing. If you take the time to walk down it, you will realize that there are no paths leading from that hall, no loot, no enemies, and no lore significance. Usually, most of the halls in Dark Souls leads to a corridor, a shortcut, or a boss fog, or at the very least, a hollow waiting to ambush you. But this walkway is just there. You could delete this entire segment from the map, and the game would function exactly the same. It is a strangely odd vacant space that most players ignore because there is zero reason for it to be there. If you make it past the Oscar encounter and reach the cliffside, the spot where the crow eventually picks you up for Firelink, most people just stare at the distance for a few seconds and make it to the end of the cliff where the cutscene takes place. But if you stand there and look at the beautiful mountain ranges that feel completely unreachable, you will notice something strange about the mountain. Scattered across these mountain ranges are tiny, low-resolution dark spots. At first, they look like graphical noise and shadows in the rock, but upon closer inspection, you realize that these are actually trees. It is a bizarre detail because most people associate the first tree they see in the game with Firelink Shrine and the giant crow's nest. But technically, the first trees in Dark Souls are these tiny 2D sprites plastered onto a mountain range miles away from the playable map. They are so low resolution and out of place, they almost look like glitches, but they are clearly placed there to give the sense of a world existing beyond the asylum, even if you were never meant to look at them that closely. Moving into the Firelink Shrine, we have to talk about the massive tree. It is the centerpiece of the area, and From Software clearly put a lot of work into it to nail a specific cozy yet melancholy vibe. The way the leaves filter the light and the sun rays bleed through gives the shrine its iconic look. But have you seen where it's growing? The branches come incredibly close to the playable area, just barely out of reach. But the trunk is the weird part. It seems to be growing directly out of the side of the cliff. If you head down towards the cemetery, you will find another one doing the exact same thing. In contrast to real-world trees that grow through these rock formations, the ones in Firelink Shrines are pretty odd. There are no trees growing horizontally from the hole in the wall. This makes me wonder what the design process was. Was it just the easiest way they found to have a tree block out the light and create that canopy feel? Or was it a deliberate hint at the nature of the world? It feels like an allusion to the fact that Lordran is built on top of massive magical arc trees. Seeing these smaller trees poking out of the architecture like this makes you realize that the ground you're standing on isn't as solid as it seems. Speaking of architecture, up ahead in the distance from Firelink Shrine, if you look past the ruins and into the distant fog, you can see the top of a massive arc tree sprouting from the abyss below. Many players completely ignore this detail in their first playthroughs. They are usually too busy trying to figure out where to go or struggling to stay alive against the skeletons in the graveyard, rather than caring about the distant landmark. I myself only really noticed it during later runs when I finally slowed down to actually look at the world instead of just navigating it. If you connect the dots, the landmark isn't just background scenery. It's actually the top of the Great Hollow. It is incredibly cool and honestly a bit surreal to realize that you are looking at the location buried deep underground while you are standing at Firelink Shrine. It is incredible how in almost every From Software game, we can see glimpses of subsequent areas that you have already cleared or are going to clear later on. Like in Dark Souls 3 when you reach Irithyll and see the towers of Anor Londo looming above you. It is an incredibly bizarre moment. Firelink Shrine is filled with architectural oddities that don't really make any sense until you go looking for them. The most famous one is this rather odd location to place chests, which you can't get to unless you do some parkour, or drop down the elevator shaft and from there, drop into the ledge that contains the chests. It's a spot most players only find by accident or by carefully navigating the ruins of the shrine. Below the Firelink Shrine bonfire tucked away in rusted iron bars sits one of the most unsettling figures in the game, Anastasia of Astora. Her placement is deeply strange. She is trapped behind iron bars in a cramped stone alcove directly across from where Lordran eventually sits. It is one of the locations I did not even bother checking in my first playthrough. Yet its effect was very profound, as after Lordran kills the Firekeeper, the bonfire goes cold. The placement of Anastasia is more like a prison cell, as if she has been locked away specifically to ensure she performs her duty without any chance of escape. It makes you wonder about the logistics. How does she even live there? She has no bed, no space to move. It's just the cold stone and proximity to the flame. The clothes that she wears is the dingy set, which can be obtained after visiting the cell after she has been killed. The item description reads, worn by the Firekeeper at Firelink Shrine. It is thought to have once been the white robe of a maiden, but smoke and ashes from bonfires darkened it over the years. The item description leaves an uncanny revelation. Her robes, which were initially white, have been covered by smoke and ash from the countless years she has been under the shrine serving as a Firekeeper. It is rather uncanny that she has spent so many years serving countless undead, in that cold cell tucked away from the rest of the world. The game never explicitly explains why she has been barred off while the other Firekeepers, like the Lady of the Darkling in Anor Londo, are free to move around. But there is the darker logic. Anastasia is mute, and her imprisonment feels intentional to keep her from speaking her mind. We know from Dark Souls 3 that Firekeepers have a unique relationship with the truth of the world, specifically seen with the Firekeeper in Dark Souls 3. The Firekeeper in Dark Souls 3 has her eyes removed because it is impossible for the Firekeeper to look into the future and figure out the truth. When given the item, Firekeeper's Eyes, from the untended graves, she reveals the truth, that it is better for the fire to fade, and the cycle to finally end, and the natural route of the world to take place. Similarly, if Anastasia was left on mute, she might speak of the true intent of the world, that linking the fire is just a coping mechanism to artificially extend the Age of Fire. Eventually, the logs will turn to ash, and the ash itself will turn to soot. Keeping her silenced and caged ensures she remains a mindless tool for linking the flame, unable to warn the chosen undead about what's actually coming. The most bizarre part about this NPC is when Lordran kills her and the bonfire goes out. The shrine loses its warmth immediately, making you realize that the most important person in Lordran was someone tucked away in a spot you barely even looked at. You can actually take a look at the Firelink Shrine from the base of Blighttown. There are not a lot of good vantage points, but if you look carefully from the Man-Eater Mildred Swan area or the rafters of Blighttown where the Eagle Shield is located, you can see a very low resolution and low detailed version of the Firelink Shrine. Unlike the Great Hollow, which is essentially a 2D cardboard cutout when viewed from the Firelink Shrine, the shrine remains a 3D model when viewed from Blighttown. But it's an incredibly cursed version of it. It's low resolution, the textures are muddy, and the whole structure looks oddly smushed together. Moving into the Undead Burg, we have to talk about one of the most iconic and frustrating encounters in the game, the Hellkite Drake on the long stone bridge. Most players assume this dragon is a permanent fixture of the area until you kill it, but its presence is actually tied to a very specific invisible trigger point. What's truly bizarre is that you can skip this entire encounter without ever seeing the dragon. If you start with the Master Key, you can take a massive detour through the Valley of Drakes, climb up through the Darkroot Basin, and enter the Burg through the back of Havel's Tower. If you kill the Taurus demon from this direction and then walk onto the bridge, you'll find it's completely empty. There's a specific spot in the Undead Burg that normally triggers the Hellkite Drake to land. If you never step on that point, the dragon never simply appears in the world. It's an incredibly eerie feeling to walk across that massive stretch of stone in total silence. Without the constant threat of a fire-breathing drake, the bridge just feels like another piece of hollow, oversized structure. If you head to the Undead Parish Church and stand on this bridge, look up, you will see massive chains extending into the sky. These are the chains connected to the elevator shortcuts that take you back down to the Firelink Shrine. Usually in a game, you'd expect these chains to spool up or spawn in as the elevator descends. But if you look closely or use a free cam, you'll see that FromSoft took a much simpler approach. Instead of dynamic animation, chains are just always there. They just clip through the ceiling to create the illusion of movement. It is a clever bit of developer laziness that you never notice during normal gameplay. Because the ceiling is so high and dark, your brain just assumes the chain is being pulled upward. But in reality, they are just there, clipping through structure. This also occurs in other elevators in the game. The exact same thing happens with the new Londo Firelink elevator. The pathway just opposite to the Black Knight in the Undead Burg is another prime example of a path that feels like it was cut off mid-development. After you manage to take down the Knight, you are left with a long, narrow alleyway that leads absolutely nowhere. At the end of this path, there is a weird texture that looks oddly out of place. It looks exactly like the entrance to a room or a tunnel, but it's completely filled in a flat, static texture. It is not an illusory wall, and there are no secret prompts. It is just a path that might have led to somewhere which is blocked off with unmatching texture. If you use a free cam, you can look behind the wall. The mystery only deepens. There is no doorways or rooms on the other side. It's just empty space. This strongly suggests it was a removed passageway in the early design of the Burg. This could have been a shortcut to the lower levels or a completely different transition point. Or rather, this could have been just a casual room with some basic loots like firebombs or nothing too significant. Instead of redesigning the entire wall, it looks like the developers just patched the hole with a generic archway asset and blocked it off, which is kind of odd. Also in the same alleyway, there is another weird staircase that leads to a barricaded wooden door. From the outside, it is pretty trivial, but behind the wood, there is a fully functional interactable door. If you could somehow bypass the board and stand in front of it, you would actually get the button prompt to interact with it. Of course, it doesn't lead anywhere. There is no room, no loot, and no secret passage. Behind it is just the empty void behind the map geometry. It's as if the developers originally planned for a room to be there, placed the door, and then realized they didn't have the time or space to build the interior. Instead of deleting the door object, they just slapped some wooden board textures over it and called it a day. Moving on, the stone overlook where you first encounter Solea of Astora offers one of the most stunning vistas in the game. But once you stop and think about it, the view is completely bizarre. If you take a look at the horizon, it's just an endless empty cloud, stretching out as far as the eye can see. To your side, you can see the dense tree lines of what I assume is Darkroot's garden and basin. But the scale is all wrong. Just how high up are we supposed to be? In most games, you would assume the city walls are close to ground level, but if you look down from this ledge, it's impossibly high. We are talking about a city in the cloud type elevation. The clouds are actually drifting way below the Undead Burg, and the real ground must be miles beneath that. What makes this even weirder is that if you compare this view to the opening cinematic, they look nothing alike. The cinematic shows a relatively flat, sprawling city, whereas the final game features these massive cascading walls that seem to drop off into infinity. Realistically, the logistics don't make a lick of sense, but in this case, From Software clearly chose vibes over consistency. They wanted this vista to be a reward for the player, a moment of pure fantasy beauty where the sunbeams flicker onto a perfectly empty horizon. The Valley of the Drakes is easily the most bizarre zone in Lordran. It is so small that it barely feels like a full area. It is more of a narrow valley that connects some important areas in the game, but the real mystery is the place that has driven the community into a frenzy for years. It is that massive blocked-off stone gate right behind the bridge where the undead dragon rests. If you look at the architecture, it is clearly meant to be a grand entrance, but it is permanently sealed off. For a game that is famous for its interconnectivity, having such a prominent unusable door is incredibly jarring. It feels like a piece of the world that was just shut off. The most common theory is that this was originally the front door to a location we already know, or perhaps one that we lost. Because of its proximity to the elevator and the specific geography of the valley, a lot of the players have speculated that this was meant to be a direct path into Darkroot's garden, or even the ancient land of Ulasil. If you look at the map, the Valley of the Drake sits right beneath Ulasil, and the blocked gateway loosely points towards the Chasm of the Abyss. It might suggest that early in game development, this path was meant to lead into the Chasm of the Abyss, but after a while, they kind of neglected the idea and just scrapped it. Something else that is extremely strange is the fact that the Abyss, which is the arena in the new Londo ruins, where you fight the four kings, are really close and overlap each other by a bit. Another odd place is the bridge, that has a ton of these blue drakes just chilling. Unlike the Undead Burg, where every hollow is placed with specific purpose, patrolling a balcony, hiding behind a corner for an ambush, or guarding a door, the blue drakes are just there. They are just standing around on this bridge like they just dropped into the map by a level editor, without a second thought. But when you look at what these creatures actually are, the mystery gets deeper. They are the only enemies in the game besides the gargoyles in Anor Londo that spew lightning. It is rather strange that a creature or a race that is symbolic of breathing fire is actually spewing lightning. No other dragon in the trilogy does this besides those blue drakes, and this is the only place where we see their kind. I think they are mutant descendants of ancient dragons. If you look at their size and the fact that they can fly, they seem like infants or smaller drakes. In the lore of Dark Souls, we know that the gods used lightning to peel apart the scales of the ancient dragons. It is entirely possible that the gods enslaved these smaller drakes, mutating and imbuing them with lightning power to use as hunting patrols or even mounts to hunt down their own kind. It would explain why they spew the very elements that was used to commit genocide against the dragons. Why are they just chilling in the valley? It is somewhat the middle ground. It is tucked between the heights of Firelink Shrine and the depths of New Londo and Blighttown. It is a quiet, isolated canyon where they are not bothered by humans or gods anymore. The only other resident is the undead dragon, which is ironically a rotting carcass of their own ancestor. They found a strange, silent sanctuary in a place that serves as nothing more than a back alley shortcut for the player. Making our way to the Darkroot's garden, the grave of Artorias is one of the most somber locations in the game, but the sheer volume of weapons scattered around the arena is rather odd. Why are there tons of weapons scattered around this area? Surely I don't think this is just for the sake of design, but upon closer inspection, you realize that it's a graveyard. There are dozens of swords, spears, and shields thrust into the dirt, many of them rusted and withered by time. It's a bizarre sight for a boss arena until you realize what they represent. They are the remains of every adventurer who came before you, trying to challenge Sif to obtain the Covenant of Artorias ring. Everyone wants that ring so they can descend into the Abyss and fight the Four Kings, but Sif is there to make sure that never happens. He's seen what the Abyss did to his master, Artorias, how it corrupted his soul and broke his body, and he has spent centuries putting down anyone strong enough to make it to his arena just to save them from that same fate. Each of these weapons represents a chosen undead who failed the test. Sif has spent an eternity killing the very people he's trying to protect, turning his master's resting place into a mountain of steel, just to ensure the darkness of the Abyss stays contained. Just behind the grave of Artorias is one of the most heartbreaking sights in the game. We see the corpse of Kirin. The story of this oddity goes way back to the events of Ulasil Township and the growth of the Abyss. Artorias, due to the presence of Manus and the rapid growth of the Abyss, was sent to fight Manus and put a stop to his growth. But he was later consumed by the Abyss himself and could not stop it. When we fight him, he is only a fragment of what he once was. After defeating him, Kirin appears to mourn his grave, but this is where the odd part comes in. The grave of Artorias which appears in Sif's arena is not the same grave as seen in the Ulasil Colosseum. If you look at the modern-day Darkroot's garden, the Colosseum is nowhere to be found. It's completely omitted. It's as if the entire Ulasil Township and the arena where you fought him was probably completely swallowed whole by the Abyss, leaving nothing behind but a forest. This implies that the grave we see in the present day, the one Sif guards, isn't even the original resting place. It seems the grave was relocated to this specific spot in the garden to keep it away from the encroaching darkness. But the most remarkable detail is the size of the gravestone itself. In the DLC, the grave Kirin tends to is human-sized, fitting for a memorial. But right now, the tombstone is absolutely massive, towering over the chosen undead. It is rather odd. It looks like the size of a gravestone grew alongside with Sif from the events of Ulasil, or rather, after relocating the gravestone, was changed to match his own size. Another weird location is the bridge where the Black Dragon Calametes lands in the Royal Woods. When you first cross the bridge in the Royal Woods, the Black Dragon Calamete swoops down and slams onto the masonry. You can see visible bricks and debris flying off the bridge due to his massive impact. But as soon as Calamete flies away, if you look at the bridge, it's perfectly pristine. There's not even a single scratch or missing stone. The weird part happens when you go back to the present day in Darkroot's garden. If you stand in that exact same spot on the bridge, you can notice that several bricks are actually missing, and the stone is cracked in the exact proximity where Calamete landed hundreds of years ago. It's almost like the developers forgot to put the damage in the DLC where the event actually happens, but they made sure the consequences were visible in the base game. It's a bizarre way of showing the passage of time. It's rather odd how these small details really makes the game feel more natural, and I love it. There is a cliffside in Darkroot's garden where we get some more revelations regarding the layout of Lordran. We can actually see Darkroot's garden from the balcony where we first meet Solaire, and similarly in this cliffside, we can see the Undead Burg and Parish too. But something odd that I noticed was when you stand on the exact same cliffside in the Royal Woods, which is said to be a few hundred years in the past, there is absolutely nothing but a range of empty rolling hills. The entire kingdom of the undead is just gone. This is a huge revelation about the timeline of Lordran. It suggests that during the time of Ulasil, when the Abyss was first spreading, the Undead Burg and the parish hadn't even been built yet. What makes it even weirder is that if you turn your head slightly, you can still see the massive walls of Anor Londo towering in the distance. This creates a very specific picture of the world's history. It shows that Anor Londo was the original city of the gods, sitting alone on the mountain while the surrounding lands were just wilderness. The sprawling city of the Undead Burg was likely a much later addition, built as the dark sign began to spread and the gods needed a place to coral the humans before eventually shipping them off to the asylum. Standing in that spot in the royal woods feels incredibly lonely. You are looking at a world that is still young, where the landmarks we spend the whole game navigating don't even exist yet. The layout of Alvina's Rise in the present day compared to the Ulusil township in the past is one of the most hauntingly erased locations in the game. In the DLC, we know exactly how to get to the lower levels. There is a massive elevator right here in the building that leads down to the heart of Ulusil. But when you return to that same building in the present day Darkroot's garden, then we can observe that in the place where Alvina now sits, that elevator is completely gone. I think this was deliberately paved over. If you look at the floor where the elevator should be, it's covered in dirt and stone tiles. Sounds like a desperate permanent seal. And it's not just the elevator. If you look to the left of the cliffside where the massive Ulusil Colosseum used to stand, the entire structure has vanished. This confirms the Abyss's terrifying scale. It didn't just corrupt the township, it physically consumed it. The town and the arena where Artorias fell were likely pulled so deep into the void that they were completely omitted from the modern map. The people of Darkroot, or perhaps the forest protectors, likely saw the elevator as a direct vein leading into the darkness, so they decided to seal it off. But it's rather odd. Most of the blocked paths have a pile of stone or rubble, but here, the elevator is simply just covered in dirt and stone tiles. It's like the developers just magically omitted it without leaving a trace. The frog rays in Darkroot's Basin are easily some of the most bizarre and out-of-place creatures in the game. They are clumped together in this specific patch of the forest and appear nowhere else in the entire series. Most of the players just slash through these beings and never see them until their next playthrough. But these creatures are odd in themselves. Their basic attack is just their simple flailing tongue attack, but if you take the time to lure one of them into a nearby pool of water, you will see a completely different animation that probably only few have noticed. Once a frog ray touches the water, it stops using its legs to crawl. Instead, it starts gliding across the surface like a literal ray in the ocean. It's a specialized animation for an enemy that is almost never found near water. Even weirder is their rare attack. If you stay at a distance while they are in this water gliding state, they can perform a move where they spit a stream of gross, thick sludge at you. Because these enemies are usually found on dry land and players tend to kill them instantly, this sludge spitting attack is one of the rarest combat animations in the game. It's a strange amount of effort for the developers to put into a trash mob that only exists in one tiny corner of the woods, making them feel like a remnant of an experimental ecosystem that was mostly cut off from the final map. Also, the Moonlight Butterfly Tower and Bridge in Darkroot's Garden are one of those locations that feels beautiful, yet eerily odd. Once you defeat the boss and cross that bridge, you find yourself at the base of a massive spiraling stone tower. But as you climb to the top, the sense of emptiness only grows. At its peak, you find a petrified blacksmith and also a divine ember. This is one of the most unexplained weird spots in the game. There are no descriptions, no dialogues, and no notes explaining what happened here. What caused these blacksmiths to petrify? Well, I guess we will never know. Also, from a design perspective, this tower is incredibly odd. You have this massive ornate piece of architecture that exists for the sole purpose of housing one item and a statue. There are no enemies inside, no hidden rooms, and no lore implications. It feels like an incomplete area. Also, if you look from the bridge, you will see a dozen of windows and balconies that suggests a complex interior. But if you clip through the buildings, you will not see anything. They were just placeholders, textures slapped onto the outside of a 3D model that has no corresponding internal geometry. That room at the very entrance of Blighttown, just after you exit the Gaping Dragon's arena, is oddly empty. It's a massive circular chamber that looks like it was designed for a major encounter, but instead, you just find a single chest. Inside that chest is a dragon scale. The location of the item is actually meaningful. If you connect the loose dots, this room is situated directly beneath the Gaping Dragon's boss room. We know the Gaping Dragon is a descendant of the everlasting dragons that became a mutated gluttonous monster from eating all the sewage and filth of the depths. It makes total sense that it is rotted and transformed. It would shed its ancient scales, which then washed down into this lower chamber. As for why it's tucked neatly inside a chest, that's where the logic gets weird. It's as if someone found this piece of godlike being washed through the sewers and decided it was precious enough to lock away. As you descend the scaffolding in Blighttown, you'll eventually see the massive wooden elevator. If you look closely at the mechanism, you'll see a flaming attack dog inside, walking and spinning the wheel. It's an incredibly odd and almost darkly comedic sight. In any other fantasy game, you'd expect a gear system, a steam engine, or a magical seal to power something this large. Instead, From Software went with the most low-tech solution possible. It makes Blighttown feel even more desperate and improvised. The real weird spot logic comes in when you mess with the game's mechanics. If you use a bow, glitches, or cheats to kill that dog while inside the wheel, the dog will die, but the wheel never stops spinning. The wheel animation is a separate entity from the NPC dog. The dog is just a visual prop placed there to give the illusion of power. The wheel itself is programmed to rotate regardless of whether its engine is breathing or not. Another strange sight in the scaffolding is definitely the parasitic wall hugger. It's a massive pulsating creature that's literally mounted horizontally out of the tunnel. Its bulbous body is covered in thin, twitching hairs that feel like the stagnant air of the swamp. But the true weirdness lies in its total lack of reaction. Unlike almost every other foe in Lordran, the wall hugger provides zero visual or audio feedback when attacked. You can strike it with a blade or a spell, and it remains motionless, absorbing the damage in a silence that feels like a glitch. There is a jarring defiance in its design. It protrudes horizontally from a tunnel entrance, jutting out like a physical error in the map. While other Blighttown enemies look like victims of filth and pus, this entity feels like a chaos creation, a byproduct of the Witch of Izalith's failed flame. Also, the Japanese internal codename for this creature is Prince Izalith. This suggests that it might have been something significant of an NPC, or a creature tied to the Chaos Sisters and the Witch of Izalith, meaning that early in the game's development itself, the creature was scrapped off and then replaced here in Blighttown. In the new Londo ruins, you will find the most out-of-place hollow in the entire game. While the rest of the hollows in this area are in a state of absolute mental collapse, bashing their heads against the stone walls or weeping in fetal positions, there is one single hollow just lounging on the ground. He's positioned in a relaxed side-lying pose, propped up on one elbow as if he is sunbathing on a beach. The community has nicknamed him everything, from the lounging hollow to the pervert-ass hollow, because of how casual he is. While his neighbors are screaming and losing their minds, he's just cooling, seemingly admiring the view of the flooded ruins. What is mechanically weird about him is that he has a unique static animation. Most hollows in the game use the same shared animation sets for idling or crying, but his lounging pose is almost never seen anywhere else in the game. And on top of that, he's not even aggressive. He's just weird and chill. Rickard's cell is situated on a narrow, broken staircase leading down to the water in New Londo, and it is arguably even more bizarre than Anastasia's. While Anastasia is tucked under a staircase in a built-up area of Firelink, Rickard is literally shoved into a hole in the masonry. The cell is tiny, significantly smaller than the one the Firekeeper resides in. But the real kicker is that it has no door or gates. If you look at the geometry behind the bars, it's a solid stone box. There isn't even a trapdoor in the ceiling. Logically, there is no way for a human being to have entered that space, let alone stayed there with enough minimal tools to function as a master blacksmith. The Abyss is another weird location, as after the four kings are defeated, the pure white light of the arena vanishes, leaving you in a pitch-black void, and that's where the weirdness truly starts. A bonfire spontaneously manifests in the center of the void. Mechanically, it's a necessity so that the player isn't stranded in a dimension with no exit. But from an immersion standpoint, it's a total anomaly. For one to ignite in the heart of the Abyss, the very antithesis of the fire, makes zero sense. What's even more jarring is the visual quality. Because there's no floor geometry in the Abyss, the bonfire looks like a 2D asset floating in a vacuum. It creates this bizarre artificial look, as if the developers just dragged and dropped a bonfire.obj file into a black skybox. Probably the most eerie location in Anor Londo has to be the chapel with a Titanite demon in it. You are navigating the pristine hallways as you enter the door, and then you are met with a massive stone-skinned monster that is taking up the entire room for itself. The most immediate and strange thing about this room is the simple logic of physical space. The door you use to enter the chapel is a standard human-sized double door. There are no other entrances, no windows large enough to fit through, no ceilings, and no secret passages. So the biggest oddity here would be the fact that how did the Titanite demon even enter? Also, the room is clearly a prayer room or a chapel. You can see the podium for the priest, the small staircase leading to the altar, and the general layout with benches used as a place of worship. There is no lore entry explaining this placement. It's a weird spot that feels like the developers just needed a mini-boss and placed a Titanite demon there. Also, if you fight this demon here, you will notice the technical glitches. When the Titanite demon performs its jumping slam attack, its massive catchpole and its single leg often clip through the walls and floor. Because the room is so small for an enemy of that size, the game's collision detection struggles to keep the demon inside the box. You will often see its tail or weapon disappear into the stone of the chapel, only to reappear a second later. It's a perfect example of a weird spot where the enemy's moveset was clearly designed for a more open area, but was shoved into a tiny room regardless of the visual glitches it causes. In one of the side hallways of Anor Londo, you'll find a room that looks like a mundane kitchen or a storage area. But if you strike the back of the hearth fire, an invisible wall vanishes, revealing one of the most lore-heavy weird spots in the game. Down a dark staircase is a basement that feels like a tomb. This room is terrifyingly out of space. It's pitch black, deathly silent, and completely devoid. A threat in this basement only makes you feel more unsure. You find several chests here, one of which is a mimic, but the real prize is the Occult Club. This discovery suggests a massive hidden rebellion within the walls of Anor Londo. Havel the Rock, a legendary hero and close ally of Gwyn, was a prolific dragon killer. His hatred for dragons was his defining trait. So, when Gwyn allowed Seath the Scaleless, a dragon, to live within the archives and gain the status of a duke, it was the ultimate betrayal of Havel's beliefs. This hidden room was Havel's secret armory. He crafted the Occult Club, a weapon specifically designed to hunt and kill gods, and hid it here, in this kitchen storage area. It was the one place in Anor Londo where no god, noble, or divine would ever be able to set foot. Standing in that dark, cold basement, you're looking at the evidence of a coup that never happened. Also, there are two bedrooms which probably belong to Guinevere and Gwyn, where both of them are weirdly odd. The rooms are well furnished and very much livable, but what is the most offsetting part is that the beds in these chambers, they are barely larger than a standard human bed. For a kingdom built by and for the gods, this is a massive inconsistency. We know that Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, was a tall, imposing figure much larger than the player character. We know the Nameless King and Gwendolyn are also significantly taller than any human. Yet the doorways leading to these bedrooms are standard human-sized arches. There is not a single chance that Gwyn, in his prime, could have fit through these doors without ducking or squeezing, and he certainly couldn't have slept comfortably in those beds. Also, Guinevere. When you meet her, she's a literal giant, reclining on a couch that is the size of a small house. If that is her actual size, she couldn't even fit her head through the hallways of Anor Londo, let alone find a room to sleep in. The Guinevere we see is a complete fabrication by Gwyndolin. While the gods were certainly larger than humans, the Princess of Sunlight we encounter is likely an exaggerated, idealized version. The real Guinevere would certainly be smaller than that, but even then, the bedrooms remain a mystery. It's as if the developers built the bedrooms using human assets and the hallways using god assets, and the two quite never met in the middle. The Great Hall of the Painted World, that massive echoing chamber where the painting of Ariamis hangs, is perhaps the most surreal example of proportional madness in the entire game. It's a room that makes even the gods look small, and its layout is as unsettling as the guardians that protect it. While we accept that the gods were larger than humans, the architecture of this hall pushes that logic to its breaking point. The ceiling is so high it's almost perpetually shrouded in shadow, and the painting itself is the size of a multi-story building. When you see the painting guardians scattered throughout the hall, they look like ants. They are human-sized, nimble, and dressed in white, but they are dwarfed by the sheer skill of the stone slabs they stand on. These painting guardians are not cleverly placed like we see the enemies placed in Undead Burg. They are randomly scattered like Taurus demons in demon ruins, serving no purpose. Also, tucked into the corner of this massive hall just beside the painting lies a corpse wearing the Black Iron set. This is Black Iron Tarkus, the legendary knight who helped players conquer the Iron Golem in Sen's Fortress. The location of Black Iron Tarkus' corpse is also rather odd. It has been speculated for decades that Black Iron Tarkus, who specialized in heavy equipment, fell from the rafters of Anor Londo due to the massive weight imposed by the armor. But the location of his corpse makes no sense. He is tucked neatly into a corner, far from the reaches of any rafters. It has been hypothesized that the painting guardians moved his body from the spot where he fell to this corner. But due to his massive weight, I doubt even a dozen painting guardians would be able to move him. The Duke's archives house one of the most notorious technical misplacements in the series. When you exit the prison area and look out into the distance, you can see a solitary wooden door just hanging in the sky. It is not attached to a wall, it has no frame, and it is completely non-interactable. If you were to teleport up to it, you will find it has no open prompt, because it is not an object like the other doors in the game, which means you cannot interact with it. It is a fixed piece of the map that is indifferent to any changes. This floating door is a literal misplaced asset that the developers accidentally left rendered in the wrong coordinates. Another technical glitch or development mistake is seen in the Great Hollow. For years, people have observed that as soon as you enter the Great Hollow and approach the bonfire, you get 400 souls out of nowhere, without killing a single mob. This was rather odd, so the community decided to figure out this weird anomaly. So they decided to compare the amount of souls that drop after killing an enemy, and the community figured out that 400 souls were actually dropped by a basilisk. When the player triggers the loading zone for the Great Hollow, the game populates the world with its NPCs. Because this specific basilisk is positioned over a literal gap in the map's collision data, it spawns into the world and immediately obeys the game's gravity. With no floor to catch it, it plummels into the kill plane beneath the world. The player receives the 400 souls because the game registers an enemy death within the active loading zone. The shortcut to Lost Izalith, which is the same hallway where you find the Sunlight Maggot, is home to another piece of weird cut content. If you look closely at the walls, you will notice a very strange texture on one of the side panels, which does not quite match the surrounding wall. If you free cam and manage to clip through that weird texture, you will discover an entirely hidden passage that goes to nowhere. It is a fully modeled tunnel that ends abruptly in the void. Data mining and speculation suggests that this was originally intended for a rockworm ambush, followed by a possible reward at the end of the passage. For some reason, the developers scrapped the encounter, but never bothered to remove the passage or fix the breakaway texture on the wall. They just left the asset sitting there behind the wall. The walk to the bed of chaos is already a test of patience, but it houses a visual anomaly that almost every player misses because they are sprinting past the fire-breathing chaos statues. Upon closer inspection, if you look up to the structure that leads to the bed of chaos boss fight, you will notice 2 chaos fire-breathing statues on each side of the structure. But the oddity here is that they are just assets and object files in the game, meaning that they are not enemies and are just part of the environment. Also, from a distance, these statues look like normal chaos fire-breathing statues, but if you use a free cam and go near them, it is revealed that they are massive, easily towering over the chosen undead. The Valley of the Drakes houses the corpse of Witch Beatrice. What is truly odd is that it is totally disconnected. A lot of corpses we find, for example that of Black Iron Tarkus or Kirk, have kind of meaningful corpse placements that provide some level of speculation and context. But in the case of Beatrice, it is completely random. What is even odd is that the Valley of the Drakes is an early game area, and after the Lord Vessel is obtained, it is mostly ignored. Why would anyone visit Valley of the Drakes after defeating the 4 kings unless they missed out on something? There is no lore implication to her placement, and due to that, we cannot speculate any further. The placement of Sen's Fortress Bonfire is also pretty weird. A lot of players, including myself, completely missed this in my first playthrough. After navigating the fortress, you finally reach the fortress roof. Most players, exhausted and desperate for a checkpoint, see the fog gates leading directly to the Iron Golem. They assume the worst. That is, they have to beat the boss or die and restart from the Undead Parish bonfire. But off the edge of the building, you have to roll down to find this bonfire. From a standard camera angle, it looks like a bottomless pit. It is only if you rotate your camera at a very specific awkward angle while standing near a broken segment of the wall that you can see the tiny stone platform below. The bonfire pavement is also very small and it can easily be missed. Even weirder is the collision data for that ledge. If you drop too far beyond the small pavement, then you can easily fall off to your death. It's as if the developers added the bonfire at the very last second after realizing that the run back from the Undead Parish was too punishing. But they didn't have the time to build a proper room for it, so they just stuck it on a ledge and hoped players would be brave enough to jump down it. But as strange as these physical anomalies are, they pale in comparison to what was born when the world's biology truly began to curdle. Because if you think a floating door is unsettling, you haven't seen the true cost of the weirdness when it takes a more sentient and breathing form. Step out from the ruins of Lordran and move forward into the ruins of Lothric, where the fire fades for the last time. Because while the first game was built on architectural oddities and geographical fever dreams, its successor took that weird aspect and turned it into a true spectacle of body horror with its creatures. Join me as we leave the architectural glitches behind and investigate Dark Souls 3's most horrifying creatures.